Captain Jake Morrison looked at his papers at the big space station's front desk. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His small shipping business had somehow gotten him into the biggest trade meeting in the galaxy. For 3 whole weeks, important people would make deals that would change how business worked across many star systems. Captain Morrison, a robot helper, said as it walked up to him, "You need to go to Section 7, Part Delta. Remember, you must wear nice clothes for all the big meetings." Jake looked down at what he was wearing, his best jumpsuit and shiny boots. He looked like someone who worked on cargo ships, not like the fancy people around him who were used to making big decisions for whole planets. The main meeting room was amazing. It was huge and built so that many different types of alien beings could be comfortable there. Special machines kept the air perfect for everyone, and computers changed every language so everyone could understand each other. Jake found his seat way in the back, far from where the really important people would sit. He felt like a mechanic who had walked into a concert hall by mistake. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," the meeting leader said. "Please welcome Ambassador Lilia Vexthana from the Zephyrian Trade Group." Jake looked up as someone moved toward the speaking platform. She moved so smoothly it seemed like she was floating. Ambassador Vexthana was tall and beautiful, with the special features that showed she was Zephyrian royalty: pointed ears, skin that glowed and changed from gold to silver, and big eyes that seemed to notice everything. Her fancy robes flowed around her like caught starlight, and she moved with the kind of natural grace that came from hundreds of years of royal training. "Dear friends," Ambassador Vexthana began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "We are here to talk about the biggest growth of galaxy-wide trade routes ever recorded." Jake tried to listen to her words about shipping lanes and taxes, but he found himself watching the speaker herself. There was something magical about how she got the attention of hundreds of smart beings. The way she stood made it clear she belonged at the center of galaxy politics. "The new Route 7 expansion," Ambassador Vexthana continued, "will need amazing cooperation between small traders and big shipping companies." That got Jake's attention. Route 7 was exactly the kind of dangerous shipping route where his business worked. It was too dangerous for big companies, but profitable enough to make the risks worth it for small haulers like him. As the meeting went on, Jake found himself studying Ambassador Vexthana with work interest. She clearly understood the technical parts of space business in ways that many diplomats didn't. She spoke knowledgeably about cargo limits and the real challenges of keeping supply lines working across huge distances. But he was also studying her with personal interest. The way she moved when she spoke, using her graceful hands that seemed to paint ideas in the air. The way her formal clothes managed to be both proper and form-fitting, showing off her alien beauty without hurting her diplomatic authority. The confident way she held her head when other delegates asked her questions, showing that she not only understood complex policy but could think quickly under pressure. "Captain Morrison," whispered the delegate sitting next to him, a crystal being whose name Jake couldn't say. "You seem to be paying very close attention to what's happening." Jake realized he'd been staring and tried to look more diplomatically neutral. Just impressed by her knowledge. Ambassador Vexthana clearly knows what she's talking about. Indeed, the crystal delegate agreed with what might have been amusement. She's considered one of the best negotiators of her time. Brilliant mind, perfect breeding, educated in 17 different legal systems. Jake nodded, though the delegates' talk about breeding and education reminded him of the huge gap between his background and Ambassador Vexthana's. She was alien royalty born for diplomacy, while he was a human cargo hauler who'd learned to negotiate through need and hard experience. As the meeting ended and delegates began leaving for the evening break, Jake caught one more look at Ambassador Vexthana as she was surrounded by fans and advisors. She handled their attention with the same graceful skill she'd shown during her presentation, making each being feel heard while keeping her own agenda. "Quite something, isn't she?" said another delegate, following Jake's look. "Beautiful, brilliant, and completely unreachable for anyone below ambassador rank." Jake felt his face get hot, realizing his interest had been that obvious. "I was just appreciating her diplomatic style." "Of course you were," the delegate replied with knowing amusement before walking away. As Jake went back to his simple rooms in the station's civilian section, he found himself thinking about Ambassador Vexthana's presentation and wondering what it would be like to actually have a conversation with someone that smart. The realistic part of his mind pointed out that beings like her didn't associate with cargo haulers except for strictly professional reasons. But another part of his mind, the part that had driven him to build a successful business from nothing, wondered whether someone that intelligent might appreciate viewpoints that came from practical experience rather than book learning. What Jake didn't know was that Ambassador Vexthana had noticed his attention during her presentation, and that his obvious interest had been far more flattering than embarrassing. In a diplomatic world full of calculated responses and hidden agendas, there was something refreshing about someone whose real reactions were written plainly across his face. The second day of the summit brought technical meetings focusing on the practical challenges of putting new trade routes into action. Jake found himself in a smaller meeting room discussing cargo capacity with delegates who actually understood the difference between theoretical shipping models and real-world logistics. "The proposed weight limits for Route 7 are completely unrealistic," argued a Centauri trade representative, pointing at holographic displays showing fleet specifications. "No standard cargo ship can achieve those efficiency ratings while keeping safety protocols." Jake looked at the data projections and couldn't help but shake his head. "With respect, sir, those calculations assume perfect conditions that don't exist in frontier space. Real shipping through Route 7 involves asteroid field navigation and irregular gravity wells that require constant course corrections." The room fell quiet as other delegates turned to look at him. Jake realized he'd just contradicted a senior trade official in front of 24 sophisticated diplomats, and his frontier bluntness might have broken several protocols. "Captain Morrison, isn't it?" A familiar voice spoke from the room's entrance. Ambassador Vexthana had arrived, apparently drawn by the technical discussion. "Please continue. Your practical experience with frontier routes would be invaluable to this assessment." Jake felt his heart beat faster as she moved to an empty seat near his position, her presence immediately changing the mood of the entire room. "I was just pointing out that the efficiency projections don't account for real-world navigation challenges." "Interesting," Ambassador Vexthana replied, studying the holographic displays with obvious intelligence. "What factors do the models fail to consider?" For the next hour, Jake found himself in the weird position of explaining cargo hauling realities to some of the galaxy's most powerful trade officials. But instead of feeling scared, he discovered that his knowledge was genuinely valued, particularly by Ambassador Vexthana, who asked detailed questions that showed she understood both the technical and economic implications of his observations. "So the real bottleneck isn't ship capacity," she summarized, "but the time required for safe navigation through unstable stellar regions." "Exactly," Jake confirmed, warming to the subject. "You can pack a cargo hold to maximum capacity, but if you have to reduce speed by 40% to avoid gravitational problems, your effective throughput drops dramatically." Ambassador Vexthana nodded thoughtfully, her glowing skin shifting to patterns that Jake was beginning to recognize as signs of intellectual engagement. which suggests that our infrastructure investments should prioritize navigation aids rather than simply expanding cargo vessel size. The discussion continued with Jake providing practical insights that clearly impressed the assembled diplomats. But what struck him most was how Ambassador Vexthana engaged with his expertise, not as a superior humoring a subordinate, but as an equal seeking to understand perspectives different from her own. "Captain Morrison," she said as the session concluded, "would you be available for additional consultation? Your insights could significantly improve our Route 7 proposals." Jake felt a mixture of professional pride and personal excitement. "Of course, Ambassador. I'm honored to help." As other delegates filed out of the conference room, Ambassador Vexthana lingered near the holographic displays, apparently studying the route projections with renewed interest. "I have to admit," she said when they were alone, "your contributions today were far more valuable than anything in the theoretical assessments we've been reviewing." Jake moved closer to the displays, noting how the starlight from the conference room's viewports played across her skin's natural glow. "Most of the people making these decisions have never actually hauled cargo through dangerous space. The math looks good on paper, but reality has a way of complicating theoretical models." "Indeed," Ambassador Vexthana replied, turning to face him with an expression of genuine interest. "Your background must provide a very different perspective on galactic commerce." "Different and probably less sophisticated," Jake admitted. "I learned negotiation by trying to keep my ship from being taken at backwater ports. Not quite the same as formal diplomatic training." To his surprise, Ambassador Vexthana smiled. "Perhaps, but there's something to be said for education through practical necessity. Theoretical knowledge is valuable, but it's incomplete without real-world experience." They spent another 20 minutes discussing the technical aspects of frontier trade, with Jake finding himself increasingly comfortable in her presence. Ambassador Vexthana listened to his explanations with obvious intelligence, asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested in understanding rather than simply being polite. "Captain Morrison," she said finally, "I'm hosting a small reception this evening for delegates working on the Route 7 proposals. Would you be interested in attending? I believe your perspective would benefit the other participants." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. "A reception with you?" "I mean, yes, Ambassador, I'd be honored to attend." Ambassador Vexthana's smile brightened, and Jake could swear he saw her skin's glow increase slightly. "Excellent. 1900 hours in Conference Suite 7. Formal attire, though I suspect your definition of formal may be more practical than what the other delegates expect." As she left the conference room, Jake realized that he'd just been invited to an exclusive diplomatic function by one of the most elegant beings he'd ever encountered. The professional part of his mind focused on the opportunity to contribute to important policy decisions. But another part of his mind was entirely focused on the prospect of spending an evening in Ambassador Vexthana's company. That evening, Jake stood outside Conference Suite 7 wearing his best attempt at formal attire, a clean dress uniform that had seen him through previous business meetings, though it felt distinctly utilitarian compared to the elegant clothing he'd seen other delegates wearing. When he entered the reception, he immediately understood that this was a gathering of the diplomatic elite. Beings in elaborate formal wear moved through conversations with the practiced ease of those accustomed to shaping policy through social interaction. Captain Morrison, Ambassador Vexthana approached him with a welcoming smile, and Jake felt his breath catch. She was wearing a flowing gown that seemed to be woven from liquid starlight, its form-fitting design emphasizing her graceful figure while maintaining perfect diplomatic propriety. "I'm so glad you could join us." As she introduced him to other delegates, Jake found himself included in discussions that ranged from technical trade issues to broader questions of galactic economic policy. But throughout the evening, he was acutely aware of Ambassador Vexthana's presence, the way she moved through the reception with effortless grace, the intelligence in her contributions to various conversations, and the way she seemed to genuinely value his input despite their vastly different backgrounds. "You're quite the find, Captain," commented a senior Alterian diplomat during a brief lull in the conversations. Practical expertise combined with natural diplomatic instincts. Ambassador Vexthana has excellent judgment in identifying valuable allies. Jake glanced across the room at Ambassador Vexthana, who was engaged in animated discussion with several other delegates, her expressive gestures and glowing skin making her the most captivating figure in the room. "She's remarkable," Jake said without thinking, then realized how his observation might sound to a sophisticated diplomat. The Altarian's crystal features shifted in what might have been amusement. "Indeed, she is brilliant, elegant, and completely dedicated to achieving fair outcomes for all parties. Quite the complete package." As the evening continued, Jake found himself hoping that his professional relationship with Ambassador Vexthana might evolve into something more personal. But the rational part of his mind reminded him that beings like her were probably accustomed to attention from much more sophisticated admirers than a frontier cargo hauler could ever hope to be. By the summit's second week, Jake had become an unexpected fixture in the high-level policy discussions. His practical insights had proven so valuable that Ambassador Vexthana had formally requested his participation in the Route 7 working group, elevating him from observer to active participant in galactic trade negotiations. "The bottleneck analysis Captain Morrison provided has completely reshaped our infrastructure planning," announced Senior Trade Coordinator Vector during the morning briefing. His recommendations could improve shipping efficiency by 30% while actually reducing operational costs. Jake tried to look appropriately diplomatic while internally marveling at how his career had taken such an unexpected turn. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a small-time cargo hauler worried about making his ship payments. Now he was helping design trade policies that would affect millions of beings across dozens of star systems. "Captain Morrison," Ambassador Vexthana said after the session concluded, "could I speak with you privately? I have a proposition that might interest you." They walked to one of the station's observation lounges, a quiet space with panoramic views of the surrounding nebula. Ambassador Vexthana moved to the large viewport, her silhouette elegant against the cosmic backdrop. "Your contributions have been extraordinary," she began, turning to face him with an expression that seemed more personal than purely professional. "I've been authorized to offer you a permanent consulting position with the Zephyrian Trade Consortium. Your expertise in frontier operations could revolutionize how we approach remote sector development." Jake felt a rush of excitement mixed with disbelief. "Ambassador, that's an incredible offer. But I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of responsibility." "You're more qualified than you realize," Ambassador Vexthana replied, moving closer with the fluid grace that always made Jake acutely aware of her presence. "Your practical knowledge, combined with your natural diplomatic instincts, makes you exactly what our organization needs." As she explained the details of the position, significant salary, travel throughout Zephyrian space, direct involvement in shaping trade policy, Jake found himself studying her face with growing appreciation. There was genuine excitement in her expression as she described potential projects, and her enthusiasm was as captivating as her beauty. "There's another aspect to the offer," Ambassador Vexthana continued, her glowing skin shifting to patterns that Jake was learning to recognize as indicators of heightened emotion. "The position would be based on Zephyria Prime, but it would involve extensive travel to frontier regions. You'd be working closely with me on most assignments. The personal implications of her statement hung in the air between them. Jake realized that she was offering him not just a career opportunity, but the chance to continue their growing partnership on a permanent basis. Ambassador, Jake said carefully, before I respond to your professional offer, I need to ask you something personal. Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded encouragingly. Please speak freely. Over the past 2 weeks, I've come to. Jake paused, struggling to find diplomatic language for feelings that were anything but diplomatic. I've developed feelings for you that go beyond professional admiration. I know there are probably protocols and cultural considerations that make such feelings inappropriate, but I wanted you to know before I accept any position that would put us in regular contact. Ambassador Vexthana was quiet for a long moment, her skin's glow shifting through patterns that Jake couldn't interpret. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. Jake, she said, using his first name for the first time, those feelings are not unwelcome. In fact, they're reciprocated. Jake felt his heart skip several beats. They are? Did you think your interest was one-sided? Ambassador Vexthana asked with a smile that made her entire being seem to glow brighter. I've been hoping you would find the courage to address the personal dimension of our relationship. Before Jake could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of other delegates seeking Ambassador Vexthana's attention for various urgent matters. But as she moved to address their concerns, she caught Jake's eye with an expression that promised their conversation would continue. The rest of the day passed in a blur of policy discussions and technical sessions, but Jake found it difficult to concentrate on anything except Ambassador Vexthana's admission that his feelings were reciprocated. Every time their paths crossed during meetings, he caught her looking at him with expressions that seemed to hold promises of personal conversations yet to come. That evening's reception was the summit's most formal event, with delegates from across the galaxy gathering to celebrate the preliminary agreements that had been reached. Jake wore his best formal attire, though he still felt distinctly out of place among the elaborate costumes and ceremonial robes that marked galactic high society. Ambassador Vexthana appeared wearing a gown that seemed to be crafted from captured starlight, its flowing design emphasizing her graceful movements while maintaining perfect diplomatic elegance. When she moved through the reception, every being in the room seemed drawn to her presence. Quite the success story, commented the Alterian diplomat Jake had spoken with previously. A frontier cargo hauler who became one of the summit's most influential participants. And it appears Ambassador Vexthana has taken a particular interest in your contributions. Jake watched as Ambassador Vexthana gracefully navigated conversations with senior diplomats, her intelligence and charm evident in every interaction. She's remarkable, he said, then realized he'd made the same observation before. Indeed, the Alterian agreed. Though I suspect your assessment of her remarkable qualities extends beyond her diplomatic capabilities. Before Jake could respond, the evening's formal program began with various speakers addressing the assembled delegates about the historic nature of their achievements. But Jake's attention was focused entirely on Ambassador Vexthana, who was scheduled to deliver the ceremony's concluding remarks. When she took the podium, the entire chamber fell silent. Her presence commanded absolute attention as she began speaking about the importance of cooperation between different species and economic systems. The agreements we have reached, Ambassador Vexthana declared, represent more than commercial arrangements. They demonstrate that beings from vastly different backgrounds can find common ground when they approach each other with respect and genuine interest and understanding. As she spoke, Jake found himself mesmerized not just by her words, but by everything about her: the confident way she held herself, the graceful gestures that accompanied her speech, and particularly the way her formal gown emphasized her elegant figure while she moved with unconscious beauty. Her presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, and as she stepped down from the podium, Jake felt overwhelming appreciation for everything about her: her intelligence, her diplomatic skill, her dedication to fair outcomes, and yes, her stunning physical presence that made it difficult for him to think clearly whenever she was nearby. As Ambassador Vexthana approached the area where Jake was standing, accepting congratulations from various delegates, he prepared to add his own praise for her exceptional presentation. But what came out of his mouth was not the diplomatically appropriate compliment he had intended. Instead, his frontier bluntness and his overwhelmed admiration for everything about her combined into words that would either ruin his diplomatic career or change his life forever. The final day of the summit brought the formal signing ceremonies that would establish the new trade agreements as galactic law. Jake stood with the Technical Advisory Committee, still amazed that he'd somehow become part of the diplomatic process that would reshape commerce across dozens of star systems. The main assembly hall had been transformed for the occasion, with representatives from every participating government arranged in ceremonial formations around a central platform where the historic documents would be signed. The atmosphere was electric with the kind of excitement that came from witnessing genuine historical moments. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings," announced the summit coordinator, "we gather to formalize agreements that represent unprecedented cooperation in galactic commerce." Jake watched from his assigned position as senior delegates took turns addressing the assembly, each speech emphasizing the collaborative spirit that had made these negotiations successful. But his attention was primarily focused on Ambassador Vexthana, who was scheduled to deliver the ceremony's concluding remarks as the summit's primary organizer. When she approached the podium, the chamber fell into respectful silence. She wore ceremonial robes that seemed to be woven from liquid gold, their flowing design managing to be both formal and form-fitting in ways that Jake found utterly captivating. As she began speaking about the historic nature of their achievements, her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. "The agreements we formalized today," Ambassador Vexthana declared, "prove that cooperation between different peoples creates possibilities that none could achieve alone." Jake found himself nodding along with her words while simultaneously being mesmerized by everything else about her presentation: the confident way she commanded the attention of hundreds of sophisticated beings, the graceful gestures that accompanied her speech, and the way her ceremonial attire emphasized her elegant figure as she moved with unconscious beauty that made it difficult for him to focus on policy implications. "These treaties represent more than commercial arrangements," she continued. "They demonstrate our collective commitment to building prosperity through partnership rather than competition." As her presentation reached its conclusion, the assembly erupted in enthusiastic applause. Ambassador Vexthana acknowledged the ovation with gracious dignity before stepping down from the podium to accept congratulations from the assembled delegates. Jake watched as she made her way through the crowd, pausing to speak with various representatives while accepting their praise for her leadership throughout the summit. When she finally approached his section of the assembly, he prepared to offer his own congratulations for her exceptional work. "Ambassador Vexthana," he began as she drew near, "your presentation was absolutely—" But what emerged from his mouth was not the diplomatically appropriate compliment he had planned. Instead, 3 weeks of suppressed admiration for everything about her: her intelligence, her diplomatic skill, her dedicated leadership, and yes, her stunning physical presence, combined with his frontier bluntness to produce words that escaped before his diplomatic training could stop them. "And I have to say that dress makes your ass look absolutely incredible," Jake heard himself saying, the words carrying clearly in the moment of relative quiet around them. The reaction was immediate and devastating. The delegates within earshot gasped audibly, several ambassadors stared in shock, and Jake felt his face burning with embarrassment as he realized what had just escaped his mouth. In the sudden silence, he could hear his own words echoing in his memory like an accusation. Ambassador Vexthana stood frozen, her glowing skin shifting through patterns that Jake couldn't interpret. Around them, the assembled diplomats waited to see how she would respond to what appeared to be an incredibly crude comment delivered at the galaxy's most formal diplomatic occasion. Jake opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo the catastrophic breach of protocol that had just emerged from his unguarded appreciation. But before he could speak, Ambassador Vexthana's expression shifted into something that looked almost like amusement. "Well," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every being within earshot, "I have to say that your formal attire does remarkable things for your shoulders and overall physique as well." The gasps from the assembled delegates shifted from shock to amazement as they processed Ambassador Vexthana's unexpected response. Instead of the diplomatic incident that everyone had anticipated, she had transformed Jake's unguarded comment into something that sounded almost like flirtation. Furthermore, Ambassador Vexthana continued with a smile that made her skin glow brighter, "I appreciate directness in communication. It's refreshing to encounter someone whose genuine reactions aren't filtered through layers of diplomatic calculation." Jake stared at her in disbelief, hardly daring to believe that she had not only forgiven his massive breach of protocol but had actually responded in kind. "Ambassador, Jake," she interrupted gently, "did you mean what you said?" The question was delivered with enough diplomatic skill to sound like professional inquiry, but Jake could see genuine curiosity in her expression. "Every word," he replied honestly, "though I wish I'd found a more appropriate way to express it." "Appropriateness is overrated," Ambassador Vexthana said with a laugh that seemed to dispel the tension throughout their section of the assembly. "Besides, I've been hoping you would find the courage to express your personal feelings more directly." Around them, the other delegates began to understand that they were witnessing not a diplomatic disaster, but the public acknowledgement of a relationship that had been developing throughout the summit. The shocked gasps transformed into approving murmurs as beings realized they were observing a genuinely romantic moment. "So," Ambassador Vexthana said quietly enough that only Jake could hear, "about that consulting position I offered. Are you prepared to accept work that involves extensive close collaboration with someone whose physical attributes you find so distracting?" Jake grinned, feeling relief and excitement in equal measure. "I think I can manage the professional challenges, Ambassador, though I may need occasional breaks to compose myself." "I'm sure we can arrange appropriate consultation periods," Ambassador Vexthana replied with a smile that promised their working relationship would include plenty of personal components. As the formal ceremonies continued around them, Jake realized that his diplomatic career had taken yet another unexpected turn. Not only had he helped shape galactic trade policy, but he'd somehow managed to begin a relationship with the most remarkable being he'd ever encountered, all because his unguarded honesty had revealed feelings that turned out to be mutual. "One question," Jake said as they watched other delegates signing the historic agreements. "In Zephyrian culture, is it appropriate for diplomatic partners to engage in personal relationships?" Ambassador Vexthana's glowing skin shifted to patterns that Jake was learning to recognize as indicators of happiness and anticipation. "In Zephyrian culture, Jake, we believe that the most productive partnerships are built on complete honesty about all aspects of compatibility, professional, intellectual, and personal." "Then I should probably mention," Jake said with a grin, "that I find everything about you absolutely captivating: your mind, your diplomatic skills, your dedication to fair outcomes, and yes, your remarkable physical presence that makes it difficult for me to concentrate on policy discussions." Ambassador Vexthana's laugh was musical, drawing appreciative glances from nearby delegates who were clearly charmed by the unexpected romance unfolding at their diplomatic summit. Complete honesty indeed. I appreciate comprehensive assessments. And I should probably mention, she continued, moving closer with the fluid grace that always made Jake's pulse quicken, that I find your practical intelligence, your natural diplomatic instincts, and your refreshingly direct approach to communication equally captivating. Not to mention the way you fill out that formal uniform. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized that Ambassador Vexthana was continuing their mutual appreciation in front of dozens of sophisticated delegates. But instead of embarrassment, he felt a surge of happiness that she was comfortable enough to be equally direct about her feelings. So we're both guilty of inappropriate workplace assessment, Jake observed with amusement. Inappropriate workplace assessment that has led to extremely appropriate personal interest, Ambassador Vexthana corrected. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium has very progressive policies about relationships between consulting partners. As the formal ceremonies continued around them, other delegates began approaching to offer congratulations, not just for the successful trade negotiations, but for what several senior diplomats described as the most charming diplomatic romance in recent memory. Captain Morrison, said the Altarian diplomat Jake had spoken with previously, you've managed to achieve something remarkable. Not only have you contributed significantly to these historic agreements, but you've won the affection of one of the galaxy's most accomplished ambassadors. I'm still not sure how that happened, Jake admitted, glancing at Ambassador Vexthana with obvious affection. By being authentically yourself, she replied. In a diplomatic world full of calculated responses and hidden agendas, genuine reactions are both rare and valuable. Senior Trade Coordinator Vector approached their group with obvious approval. Ambassador Vexthana, Captain Morrison, I wanted to personally congratulate you both. Your professional collaboration has produced exceptional results, and your personal partnership promises to strengthen our ongoing relationships with frontier trade operations. Jake realized that their relationship was being officially recognized and approved at the highest levels of galactic diplomacy. Thank you, Coordinator. I'm honored to be part of these historic agreements. The honor is mutual, Coordinator Vector replied. We look forward to your continued contributions as Ambassador Vexthana's consulting partner. As the evening celebrations continued, Jake found himself included in conversations with the diplomatic elite, no longer as an observer, but as a recognized participant in galactic trade policy. But throughout the festivities, his attention remained focused on Ambassador Vexthana, who moved through the reception with the same graceful confidence that had first captured his attention. Jake, she said during a quiet moment between conversations, I have a confession to make. What kind of confession? Ambassador Vexthana's skin shifted to patterns that Jake was learning indicated mischief. Your comment about my physical attributes wasn't entirely unexpected. I've been aware of your appreciation for various aspects of my presence since the first day of the summit. Jake stared at her in amazement. You knew? Zephyrian empathic abilities make it difficult to hide emotional responses, she explained with obvious amusement. Your attraction has been quite obvious to me from the beginning. And you didn't say anything? I was waiting to see if you would find the courage to express your feelings directly, Ambassador Vexthana replied, though I admit I didn't expect you to choose such a public moment for your declaration. Jake laughed, shaking his head at the realization that his supposedly secret feelings had been transparent all along. So when you responded to my inappropriate comment, I was acknowledging feelings that I've been hoping you would express for weeks, she confirmed. Your unguarded honesty simply provided the perfect opportunity. As the summit's final evening drew to a close, Jake found himself looking forward to a future that would combine meaningful work with personal happiness in ways he had never imagined possible. His accidental comment had led not to diplomatic disaster, but to the beginning of a relationship that promised to be as professionally productive as it was personally fulfilling. "So," Ambassador Vexthana said as they watched the last of the formal ceremonies conclude, "are you prepared for a consulting partnership that involves extensive travel, complex negotiations, and a professional colleague whose physical presence you find distractingly attractive? Are you prepared for a consulting partnership with someone whose frontier bluntness occasionally overrides his diplomatic training?" Jake countered. Ambassador Vexthana's smile was radiant. "Jake, I'm looking forward to discovering exactly how inappropriate your comments can become when we're working in private settings." As they left the assembly hall together, Jake realized that his diplomatic career had evolved into something far more significant than professional advancement. He had found not just meaningful work, but a partner who appreciated both his practical expertise and his authentic personality, even when that authenticity led to comments that would have horrified traditional diplomats. Their relationship had become a symbol of the summit's success, proving that genuine connections could transcend differences in background, culture, and social status. And if those connections occasionally involved admirations that were expressed more directly than diplomatic protocol typically allowed, well, that just made them more honest than most relationships in the carefully controlled world of galactic politics. The last thing Jake heard as they walked toward their shared future was Ambassador Vexthana's musical laugh as she said, "I can hardly wait to see what inappropriate observations you'll make during our first official consulting mission together."